the villain who fell in love with the dead prince. Chapter 1, Villain's New Beginning. Usually, villains meet predictable endings. Some are betrayed by the very people they trusted. Some become stepping stones for heroes, destined to be defeated so that others may shine. Others survive long enough to witness the ruins of their own ambitions, spending their final years drowning in regret before dying alone, forgotten by the world they once tried to control. In the end, they all receive what people call justice, their karma, their punishment, their inevitable fate. But that was never going to be his story, because he was not an ordinary villain. He was a man feared by governments, a man who ruled the shadows beneath an entire city, a king without a crown, a monster without remorse, the man known as Hector Carmine, the king of the underworld. He is the only heir to one of the most powerful mafia cartels. His father, who is the godfather of the Carmine mafia family, is an extremely manipulative, cruel, and malevolent person, finding pleasure in others' suffering, and enjoys being in control. So, being the son of such person, even from his childhood, Hector has seen and experienced things that even a grown adult will be terrified and traumatized by just imagining them. Growing up in a place where everyone and everything is controlled and owned by his father, Hector knows he cannot own or be interested in anything, because whatever it is that Hector takes a liking to will be destroyed by his father, just to keep Hector within his control. At first, Hector desperately tries to protect the things he loves. Then, he tries to hide them from his father. But he soon realizes nothing can truly be hidden. His father's control doesn't merely oppress him. It teaches him a lesson. Attachment is dangerous. This tight control around his life only made him more withdrawn, detached, and obsessed with control. Hector learned early that attachment was a weakness, and that the only things that truly belonged to a person were the things they had the power to protect. If every person, object, dream, hobby, or relationship that Hector grows fond of is destroyed by his father, then over time Hector stops caring about possessions, because they can be taken away from him in the most painful way. He avoids friendships, because they can be used against him. He suppresses love, because love creates vulnerability. He learns that power is the only thing his father cannot easily take from him. This realization made him grow into someone cold, calculating, and emotionally detached, not because he was born evil, but because affection became synonymous with pain. This belief made him become the most influential and powerful crime lord that rivals even his own father. He has become even more dangerous than his father, because his cruelty was rational rather than sadistic. Now, as a 25-year-old, Hector Carmine is standing in the balcony of one of his private estates with a wine glass in his hand, while looking at the vastly spread night sky. The stars glitter across the night sky, like scattered diamonds upon a sea of black velvet, a breathtaking sight. At least, that was what people called it. Hector Carmine raised a wine glass to his lips and took a slow sip. The expensive vintage rolled across his tongue. Rich, refined, rare, he tasted nothing. His eyes remained fixed on the heavens above. Years ago, he vaguely remembered finding beauty in things. The sound of rain against the window, the scent of old books, the warmth of sunlight slipping through curtains in the early morning. Now they were nothing more than distant memories, forgotten sensations belonging to a forgotten person. The glass remained suspended in his hand as his gaze drifted from one star to another. People spent their entire lives chasing things. Love, power, wealth, freedom, purpose. He possessed enough power to make governments nervous, enough wealth to purchase entire city blocks, without glancing at the price. Men killed and died at the mention of his name. Yet none of it stirred anything within him. No satisfaction, no pride, no excitement, no desire, only silence. The cold night breeze swept through the balcony, causing the wine within his glass to ripple slightly. Hector watched the surface tremble. A faint thought crossed his mind. What was the point? Not as a cry of despair, not as a plea for meaning, merely a question, detached, clinical, the same way a scientist might observe an insect beneath a microscope. He had spent years building an empire, destroying rivals, manipulating allies, conquering every obstacle placed before him. And now that he stood at the top, he discovered something almost amusing. There was nothing there, no grand reward, no hidden satisfaction, just another view from another balcony in another mansion he didn't care about. For the first time in a very long while, Hector felt something close to amusement. A tiny, bitter curve touched the corner of his lips. The most powerful man in the room, the most feared man in the city, the man who could possess almost anything. And there wasn't a single thing in that world he actually wanted. 3 nights later, Hector received confirmation. His father had finally made his move. Not directly. Men like his father rarely dirted their own hands. Messages intercepted from trusted lieutenants. Secret meetings between rival families. Financial records that should not have existed. Assassins quietly moved into position. A coalition. His father, his enemies, his allies, even some of his own men, all united by a single goal: destroy Hector Carmine. Anyone else would have felt anger, betrayal, fear. Hector felt nothing. He sat alone in his study as reports continued to arrive, one after another, each confirming what he had already known. Everyone wanted a piece of the empire. Everyone wanted the throne. Everyone wanted to inherit the kingdom he had built, a kingdom he had never truly cared about. A faint smile appeared on his face. For years, they had all misunderstood him. They thought he was protecting the empire, expanding it, strengthening it. No, the empire had merely been another tool, another machine, another distraction. And now, that machine had reached the end of its usefulness. Hector closed the final report. Then he began making preparations, not to save himself, but to erase everything. Over the following weeks, invitations were sent, a historic meeting, a final negotiation, the largest gathering of powerful figures the criminal underworld had seen in decades. His father accepted, the rival families accepted, corrupt politicians accepted, business partners accepted, traitors accepted. Greed made the decision easy. Each believed they would leave that building richer than they arrived. None suspected the truth. The venue was an enormous private conference complex owned by one of Hector's shell corporations. Isolated, secure, impenetrable. Months earlier, without anyone's knowledge, Hector had transformed it into something else entirely. A tomb. The night arrived. Luxury vehicles filled the parking grounds. Bodyguards lined the halls. Powerful men exchanged handshakes while secretly planning each other's deaths. Hector watched them all from an observation room above. His father stood among them, older now, but still carrying the same cold arrogance, the same need for control, the same cruelty that had shaped Hector's life. For a moment, father and son locked eyes across the room. His father smirked, certain he had already won. Hector returned the look, then smiled, a genuine smile, the first one in years. The doors locked. At first nobody noticed. Then came the alarms. Confusion spread. Bodyguards reached for weapons. Executives checked their phones. Men began shouting. The exits would not open. The security systems no longer obeyed them. They obeyed only Hector. Panic followed. The room erupted into chaos. People screamed, threatened, begged. His father alone remained silent, because he finally understood. Hector The old man's voice echoed through the hall. "You foolish boy." Hector's voice answered through the speakers. Calm, steady, emotionless. "No, father." The room fell silent. For the first time in my life, I am doing exactly what I want. His gaze drifted over the crowd below. The traitors, the rivals, the men who worship power, the men who believed everything could be owned, controlled, inherited. You all came here expecting my empire. There will be no empire. The first detonation shook the foundations. The floor trembled. Windows shattered. Fire burst upward from the lower levels. Screams filled the air. The second wave followed. Then the third. The building became an inferno, a monument collapsing into itself. As steel twisted and flames consumed everything, Hector descended from the observation room, not toward an exit, toward the center, toward the fire. Around him, the empire died. Records burned. Fortunes vanished. Secrets disappeared. Generations of corruption were buried beneath falling concrete and flame. His father was somewhere within the chaos, for the first time beyond Hector's control, for the last time beyond anyone's. The heat grew unbearable. The ceiling began to collapse. Still Hector walked forward, with a smile on his face, not smiling because he had won, not smiling because he was free, but because the endless struggle was finally ending. The chase for power, the betrayals, the violence, the emptiness, all of it. For years, he had built an empire because he believed power could protect him from loss. In the end, he discovered power protected nothing. The flames closed around him. The world blurred into orange and white. The screams faded. The memories faded. The empire faded. And Hector Carmine stood alone at the heart of the fire as the kingdom he had built disappeared along with him. By sunrise, nothing remained but ruins. No successor, no throne, no victor, only ashes. Every person who had sought Hector's downfall perished that night, and so did Hector himself. The newspapers called it a catastrophe. Investigators called it a conspiracy. Survivors called it impossible. But those who understood the truth knew something else. The empire had not been destroyed by its enemies. It had been destroyed by the only man who ever truly owned it. And in doing so, Hector Carmine ensured that nobody would inherit the world that had destroyed him. Darkness. That was supposed to be the end. Hector remembered the flames, the collapsing steel, the deafening roar of explosions, the unbearable heat that had swallowed the empire he had spent years building. His empire, his enemies, his father, and finally himself. He remembered standing amidst the inferno with a smile on his face as everything disappeared into fire. Then, nothing, absolute nothingness. So why was he breathing? Hector's eyes snapped open. He immediately sat upright. His chest rose and fell rapidly as air filled his lungs. Alive. The realization struck him like a bullet. Alive. His eyes narrowed. That was impossible. He looked down at himself. No burns, no injuries, no scars, not even the slightest trace of damage. His fingers slowly touched his face. Smooth skin, warm flesh, a steady heartbeat. Everything felt real. Too real. The room surrounding him certainly wasn't any hospital. A massive bed draped in silk curtains stood in the center of the chamber. Golden candle holders decorated the stone walls. Intricate paintings hung between towering windows. Moonlight poured through stained glass depicting knights, dragons, and angels. The entire room looked like something torn straight from a medieval fantasy story. For a moment, Hector simply stared. Then his instincts took over. Observe, analyze, adapt the principles that had allowed him to survive his father. The principles that had built a criminal empire. He rose from the bed. The floor beneath his feet was cold marble. Every object in the room screamed wealth and nobility. Not modern wealth, ancient wealth, the kind inherited through bloodlines and kingdoms. His gaze suddenly lowered. Something felt wrong. His body, the proportions, the height, the weight, everything felt unfamiliar. Hector immediately crossed the room toward a large mirror standing near the wall. His footsteps echoed softly. Then he stopped. For the first time in years, genuine shock appeared on his face. The reflection staring back at him wasn't Hector Carmine. A young man stood in the mirror, perhaps around 20 years old. Long silver hair framed an unnaturally handsome face. Sharp blue eyes shone beneath elegant brows. His skin was flawless. His features carried the refined beauty of royalty. Hector touched his cheek. The stranger copied the movement. His expression darkened. No. The voice that emerged wasn't his. It was younger, smoother, completely unfamiliar. No. He stepped closer. The reflection did the same. His breathing slowed. His mind raced. This wasn't plastic surgery. This wasn't a disguise. This wasn't possible. He grabbed the edge of the mirror. The cold metal dug into his fingers. What the hell is going on? As if the world had been waiting for those words. Pain exploded inside his head. Hector staggered backward. A flood of images crashed into his mind. Faces, names, places, memories. None of them belonged to him. A grand castle overlooking an endless valley. Sword training beneath the scorching sun. Lessons about politics and diplomacy. Royal banquets. Noble families. Magic. Actual magic. The torrent of memories slammed into him relentlessly. A name echoed through his mind. A name that wasn't Hector Carmine. Prince Adrian Aurelius. First prince of the kingdom of Aurelius. Heir to the throne. Beloved by the people. Admired by the nobility. And dead. The realization made Hector freeze. Prince Adrian had died. Poisoned. 3 nights ago. The memories ended abruptly. Darkness. Then Hector's arrival. Silence filled the room. Hector slowly lifted his head and looked into the mirror once more. A prince stared back at him. Not a crime lord. Not a mafia king. A prince. He laughed. Once. A short, dry laugh filled with disbelief. After everything. After surviving his father. After conquering the underworld. After destroying everything with his own hands. After finally dying. The universe had decided to place him inside the body of a prince, in what appeared to be a medieval fantasy world. A world of kings, nobles, knights, and magic. His gaze drifted toward the window. Beyond it stood enormous castle walls illuminated by moonlight. Far in the distance, something massive flew across the night sky. A shadow with enormous wings. A dragon. A real dragon. The creature vanished behind the clouds. For several seconds, Hector simply stared. Then something happened. A feeling. Small. Faint. Almost forgotten. Curiosity. The first genuine emotion he had felt in years. Not power. Not ambition. Not hatred. Curiosity. A slow smile formed on his lips. The old Hector would have found that amusing. The man who destroyed an empire because nothing interested him anymore, had awakened in a world where dragons existed. Well, he looked at the moonlit kingdom stretching beyond the castle walls. This should be interesting. And for the first time since his childhood, Hector Carmine found himself looking forward to tomorrow. Chapter 2. The Prince Who Never Broke. Hector stood before the window, long after the dragon had vanished beyond the clouds. Moonlight spilled across the stone floor. A strange silence filled the room. Not the empty silence he had grown accustomed to in his previous life. This one felt alive. For a moment, he simply stared at his reflection in the glass. Silver hair, blue eyes, the face of Prince Adrian Aurelius. A dead prince whose body he now occupied. The irony was not lost on him. A man who had spent his entire life fighting for power had died. A prince born with power had died as well. Different worlds, Different lives, the same ending. A faint knock suddenly interrupted his thoughts. 3 soft taps. Hector's eyes narrowed. The door slowly opened. A young maid stepped inside carrying a tray of medicine. She looked exhausted. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes, as if she hadn't slept properly for days. The moment her gaze landed on him, the tray slipped from her hands. The ceramics shattered against the floor. The maid froze. Her eyes widened. Her lips trembled. "Your Highness?" Hector remained silent. The girl stared at him, as though she had seen a ghost. Then tears rapidly filled her eyes. Your Highness." The maid burst into tears. Before Hector could say anything, she rushed out of the room. "The prince has awakened." Her scream echoed throughout the corridor. "The crown prince has awakened." Chaos followed. Within minutes, the entire castle seemed to explode into activity. Servants ran through hallways. Knights abandoned their posts. Royal healers rushed toward the prince's chambers. No one knew the truth. No one knew Prince Adrian Aurelius had died 3 nights ago. No one knew the person standing inside that room was Hector Carmine. To them, it was a miracle. The poison used against the crown prince was infamous throughout the continent, a poison so lethal that not a single recorded victim had ever survived it. There was no antidote, no cure, no healing spell powerful enough to reverse its effects. Once the poison entered the body, death was considered inevitable. Even the kingdom's greatest healers had quietly begun preparing themselves for the worst. The royal family had already started discussing funeral arrangements behind closed doors. The nobles were waiting for the announcement. The people were praying for one final miracle that none truly believed would come. Everyone had accepted that Prince Adrian Aurelius, the beloved crown prince of the kingdom, was living his final days. Yet now, the prince, who should have been dead, was standing before them, alive, uninjured, awake, as though death itself had failed to claim him. To the entire kingdom, there could be only one explanation. It was a miracle. The crown prince had finally awakened. The following week passed in a blur. Royal healers examined him endlessly. Nobles came bearing gifts. Priests offered blessings. Servants cried tears of joy. Even commoners gathered outside the palace to pray for his recovery. It was overwhelming. Hector had spent his previous life surrounded by fear. People obeyed him because they feared him. People respected him because they feared what would happen if they didn't. But Adrian had been loved, genuinely loved by his people. The realization disturbed Hector more than he cared to admit. As days passed, Hector slowly sorted through the prince's memories. Thousands upon thousands of memories. Fragments at first, then entire years. And the more he learned, the less he understood. Prince Adrian Aurelius was everything Hector wasn't. Kind, patient, honest, merciful, the perfect prince, the perfect heir, the perfect son, the perfect future king. The people adored him. The knights admired him. The nobles respected him. Even neighboring kingdoms praised him. Any king would have been proud to have a son like Adrian. Yet the deeper Hector dug into those memories, the uglier the truth became. Adrian's mother had died when he was young, and with her death came the collapse of the political faction that had protected him. The power once held by the queen had gradually passed into the hands of another woman, the king's favorite consort, a woman who would eventually become the new queen. From that moment onward, Adrian stood alone. No powerful maternal family, no loyal faction, no overwhelming political support, only his title as crown prince. A title coveted by countless people. A title that painted a target on his back. The court wanted to control him. The nobles wanted to manipulate him. The queen wanted to weaken him. Every smile hid an agenda. Every gift carried strings. Every alliance demanded a price. Yet Adrian never fought back openly. Not because he lacked intelligence or courage, but because he understood something few others did. One wrong move could start a civil war. One reckless decision could destabilize the kingdom. One open conflict could cost countless innocent lives. So he endured, he compromised, sacrificed, retreated, yielded, all to protect the kingdom he loved. Many people misunderstood him. Some nobles called him weak. Others called him a coward. Some secretly mocked him as a puppet. A prince too gentle for politics, too kind for power, too soft for the throne. Hector had initially believed the same, until he saw everything. Every sleepless night, Adrian dedicated for the betterment of his people. Every assassination attempt, every political trap, every sacrifice Adrian made behind closed doors. And through it all, Adrian never changed. He never became bitter, never became cruel, never became corrupt, never abandoned his principles. Even when everyone around him demanded he do so, Hector sat alone in his chambers one evening, the memories slowly settling inside him. The sun dipped beneath the horizon. Golden light illuminated the room. His gaze drifted toward the empty chair nearby. No one sat there, yet Hector found himself speaking anyway. Perhaps to the lingering memories, perhaps to the dead prince, perhaps to himself. "You were an idiot." The room remained silent. A faint smile appeared on Hector's face. "You had every reason to become a monster." He remembered the betrayals, the manipulation, the isolation, the poison, the countless attempts to break him. Yet Adrian had endured everything without abandoning who he was. Hector slowly closed his eyes. In another world, under different circumstances, they might have hated each other. One ruled through fear, the other through kindness. One abandoned morality, the other clung to it until death. Yet strangely, Hector felt respect, a respect he had rarely felt for anyone. "You fought your battles differently than I would have." His voice became quieter. "You lived in a way I would have considered pathetic." He opened his eyes. The setting sun reflected within them. "But you weren't weak." For the first time since arriving in this world, Hector spoke sincerely. "You were stronger than most people I've ever known." The room remained silent, yet somehow the burden within his chest felt lighter. A small smile appeared on his face. "Rest peacefully, Adrian." His gaze shifted toward the kingdom beyond the palace walls, toward the throne, toward the enemies waiting in the shadows, toward the people who had poisoned the crown prince. His smile slowly widened. Cold, dangerous, familiar. "Now watch carefully." The former king of the underworld rose from his seat. "I'll show you how to handle the things you've been handling wrong all along." Far away, beyond the palace walls, storm clouds gathered over the kingdom, and for the first time, the game, truly, began. Chapter 3. The Things a Prince Endured. The week following Hector's awakening passed quietly, at least outwardly. To everyone else, Crown Prince Adrian Aurelius was simply recovering from a miraculous survival. To Hector Carmine, however, every day was another lesson in learning how to live as someone else. A strange thought for a man who had already lived 25 years. Yet this new life was different. The first challenge was surprisingly mundane. Walking. Not because Adrian's body was weak. Quite the opposite. Years of swordsmanship training had made the prince physically capable. The problem was that Hector wasn't accustomed to moving like Adrian. Adrian carried himself with elegance. Every movement was refined, every gesture deliberate. Even the way he stood reflected years of royal education. Meanwhile, Hector had spent most of his life surrounded by criminals, bodyguards, and politicians. His movements were efficient, predatory, dangerous. More than once, he caught servants staring nervously when he unconsciously walked to the palace corridors like a man hunting prey. It amused him, as did many other things. The palace itself, the endless etiquette, the formal greetings, the noble customs, the countless faces he now had to remember. Fortunately, Adrian's memories helped. Whenever Hector encountered someone, memories surfaced naturally. Names, relationships, histories, political affiliations, secrets. Within days, he began familiarizing himself with the routines of palace life. Morning audiences, lessons on governance, meals with royal officials, meetings, sword training with the knights, walks through the palace gardens, studying the magic theories in the royal libraries. At first, it felt unnatural, like wearing someone else's skin, which, in a sense, he was. But as days passed, the memories became easier to navigate. The palace slowly transformed from a maze into a familiar home. The servants knew him. The knights greeted him respectfully. The maids smiled warmly whenever they saw him, not because they feared him, not because they wanted something, simply because they were happy he was alive. The feeling remained foreign to Hector, yet he found himself not hating it. During the day, he behaved as a recovering crown prince. At night, however, he investigated. All the while he was searching for answers, for clues, for the truth behind Adrian's poisoning. The official investigation had already begun. The king himself had ordered it. A special investigative committee had been assembled. Royal guards were conducting searches. Witnesses were questioned. Reports were submitted daily. To any outsider, it appeared thorough, professional, and uncompromising. Hector almost laughed. It was a performance, a beautiful performance, but performance nonetheless. He spent hours reading reports from Adrian's memories and comparing them with recent findings. The more he studied, the clearer the answer became. The issue wasn't a lack of evidence. There was too much evidence, too many witnesses, too many suspicious movements, too many inconsistencies. The investigation wasn't failing because there were no leads. It was failing because someone was making sure those leads went nowhere. Reports disappeared. Witnesses changed their statements. Evidence became misplaced. Certain suspects were quietly ignored. Others were conveniently cleared. Someone powerful was intercepting everything. And the worst part? The king knew. Hector was certain of it. The king's intelligence network was too extensive. His political experience too great. A ruler who had governed for decades could never be blind to something this obvious. Yet he remained silent. The realization left a bitter taste in Hector's mouth, because this wasn't the first time. As he explored Adrian's memories, he discovered countless incidents. Those Adrian has buried deep inside himself. An assassination attempt during a hunting trip, dismissed. A poisoned gift sent to his chambers, ignored. A servant bribed to spy on him, forgotten. Political schemes, threats, sabotage, humiliation. Again and again, every single one followed the same pattern. Someone would target Adrian. Evidence would surface. The king would launch an investigation. Nothing would happen. The matter would quietly disappear. Each time, Adrian endured. Each time he fought alone. The memories became increasingly difficult to watch, especially those from Adrian's childhood. One memory in particular refused to leave Hector's mind. A small boy sat alone in a massive room. Silver hair, red eyes swollen from crying. Only 6 years old. His mother had died mere weeks earlier. The palace felt colder, emptier, scarier. The child had gathered his courage and approached his father, the king, the one person who should have protected him, the one person he desperately needed. Instead, he received only a cold response. A prince must learn to overcome hardships. A future king cannot depend on others. If you cannot handle these small difficulties, how will you protect the kingdom? Hector's hands unconsciously clenched. The memory continued. The child lowered his head, trying not to cry, trying not to disappoint his father, trying to be strong. 6 years old, not 16, not 20, not 30. 6. Hector felt something unpleasant twist inside his chest. Another memory surfaced. Adrian at 9. Another assassination attempt, severely wounded and bedridden. No visit from king. None cared. Just another investigation. Another failure. The king gave the same answer. Another memory. Adrian at 12. Another betrayal. Another lesson. Another dismissal. Another memory. Another year. Another wound. Another disappointment. The same response every time. A prince must endure. A future king must overcome challenges. A ruler must stand alone. The words sounded reasonable when spoken to an adult. To a child, standing alone in a palace, filled with enemies. A child desperately searching for comfort. And his father had looked him in the eyes and told him to endure, again and again, until the child became a young man, until the young man became a prince, until the prince became a corpse. The wooden armrest beneath Hector's hand cracked. His grip had unconsciously tightened. He stared at the splintered wood. The room suddenly felt smaller, suffocating. For several moments he sat in silence. Then he realized something strange. He was angry, not annoyed, not irritated. Angry, genuinely angry. The realization shocked him. Hector Carmine rarely became angry. Not even when people betrayed him. Not even when his father tortured him psychologically. Not even when entire organizations conspired against him. He had learned long ago that anger clouded judgment. Yet now, his blood boiled, not for himself, but for Adrian, for a dead prince he had never met, for a person who no longer existed. The absurdity almost made him laugh. Why did he care? Why was he feeling this way? The memories offered no answer, only emotions, strange emotions, unfamiliar emotions. As the days passed, they only grew stronger. Sometimes Hector would find himself staring out a window, wondering, what if things had been different? What if he had been born in this world? What if he had met Adrian as a child? The thought was ridiculous, impossible, yet it persisted. He imagined a lonely silver-haired boy, sitting in a dark room after losing his mother, trying not to cry, trying to be brave, trying not to break. And for reasons he couldn't understand, Hector wished he had been there. He wished he could have sat beside him, told him he wasn't weak, told him he wasn't alone, told him that enduring pain wasn't the same thing as deserving it. The image remained stubbornly fixed in his mind. A child sitting alone in darkness. No friends, no support, no one to lean on. And somehow that image hurt more than any memory of his own childhood ever had. The realization frightened him. But why? Why did Adrian's memories affect him so much? Why did every painful memory feel like a thorn lodged inside his chest? Hector Carmine did not sympathize with people. He did not mourn strangers. He did not imagine impossible futures. Yet here he was, doing all three. A bitter laugh escaped him. What a ridiculous situation. The former king of the underworld leaned back in his chair. His gaze drifted toward the evening sky, beyond the palace window. The same stars hung above him. Different world, different sky, yet somehow familiar. His thoughts drifted toward Adrian once again. Somewhere within the countless memories residing inside him remained the traces of Adrian Aurelius, a boy who cried alone after his mother's death, a prince who sat in dark rooms because showing weakness would only invite more attacks, a dreamer who smiled for the kingdom while silently enduring everything by himself, a fool, a good man, a dead man. Hector slowly closed his eyes. You really were hopeless. Hector murmured, but you deserved better. Silence answered him, yet the silence felt oddly comforting. You really were a troublesome person, Adrian. You made it impossible not to respect you. A faint smile appeared on Hector's lips. Slowly, he raised his eyes toward the night sky. The night breeze brushed against his silver hair. No answer came, only silence. Yet somehow Hector didn't feel alone. For a moment, he imagined Adrian standing beside him, watching the kingdom they now shared. He felt Adrian listening, Perhaps it was only his imagination. Perhaps it was guilt. Perhaps it was something else entirely. Hector opened his eyes. The softness disappeared. In its place returned the dangerous calm that had once terrified governments and crime syndicates alike. His mind became clear, focused, cold. The people responsible for Adrian's suffering still lived. The people responsible for his poisoning still breathed. The people who had pushed him into loneliness still walked freely through this palace. That would change. Slowly, carefully, methodically, just as Hector Carmine had always done. I promise you this, Adrian. His voice was barely above a whisper. The justice you never received. The evening wind entered through the open window. I'll make sure they receive it. A dangerous smile appeared on his face, the kind that usually preceded someone's downfall. Yet neither Hector nor anyone else realized something important. His desire for justice was no longer merely respect for Adrian, nor was it simple gratitude for inheriting his body. Without realizing it, Hector had begun forming a bond, a connection unlike anything he had ever experienced. Not with power, not with ambition, not with control, but with another person. A person he would never meet. A person who had spent his entire life alone. A person already gone. And perhaps because Adrian was gone, Hector never noticed how deeply that connection had already rooted itself within his heart. And this connection, this bond, was changing him far more than he realized. Chapter 4. The garden only one person knew. After realizing the royal investigation was little more than a stage play performed for public appearances, Hector decided there was no point waiting for others to uncover the truth. If Adrian's enemies were powerful enough to interfere with the king's investigation, then he would simply investigate them himself. Fortunately, Adrian had already done most of the hard work. Unfortunately, Adrian had hidden that work in a place that made Hector question the prince's priorities. A secret intelligence network. Hector muttered while walking through the palace, and he hides in the flower garden. He shook his head. Adrian, if you had put half this creativity into politics, you might still be alive. A passing servant nearly dropped the tray she was carrying. The crown prince was apparently arguing with himself. Again, rumors had already started spreading. Some believed the poison had damaged his memory. Others believed he had achieved enlightenment. The head healer had privately concluded that the prince's brain had simply become strange. Hector thought that was the closest anyone had gotten to the truth. Following Adrian's memories, Hector made his way toward the most isolated section of the palace, the late Queen's Garden. Even before reaching it, Hector could feel something different. The noise of the palace gradually faded. The endless politics, the servants, the guards, the nobles, all of it seemed far away, as though the garden existed in its own little world. When he finally stepped through the entrance, he stopped. For several seconds, he simply stood there. The garden was beautiful, not because it was grand. It wasn't. No, not compared to the gardens Hector had seen throughout his previous life. His old estates had contained imported flowers worth fortunes, rare trees from different continents, landscapes designed by experts, entire teams of gardeners dedicated to maintaining them. Compared to those places, this garden was modest, yet somehow it felt warmer, more alive. Sunlight filtered through flowering branches. Butterflies drifted lazily through the air. Small streams wound between flower beds. The scent of blooming flowers filled the breeze, and everywhere he looked, there were signs of care. Not professional care, personal care. Someone loved this place. Someone had spent years tending every corner. Someone had poured their heart into it. That someone was Adrian. A strange warmth settled in Hector's chest. The feeling was becoming increasingly common lately. He still hadn't decided whether he liked it. As he walked deeper into the garden, memories surfaced naturally. Young Adrian kneeling beside flower beds. Teenage Adrian planting saplings. Adult Adrian carrying watering cans while covered in dirt. Hector paused. "Why are you covered in mud?" one of the flower fairies questioned Adrian. Adrian proudly held up a tiny flower. "I planted it." He replied like he is very proud of his accomplishment. "You look like you lost a fight against the ground," the fairy stated. "It was a difficult battle," Adrian replied. The fairy gave him a judging stare in silence. "Victory required sacrifices," Adrian retorted back, totally offended by the stare the fairy was giving him. Even remembering that memory of Adrian made Hector snort. Another memory surfaced. Adrian crouching beside a flower. "Bloom faster." "Nothing happened." "I said bloom faster." "Still nothing." "You are a flower. This is literally your job." The flower remained unmoved. A tiny flower fairy sitting on a nearby leaf burst into laughter. Adrian pointed accusingly. "Don't encourage its laziness." The fairy laughed harder. Hector rubbed his forehead. "The crown prince of the kingdom." He looked toward the sky. "The future ruler of millions." Another memory. Adrian standing with crossed arms before a rose bush. 3 months. The rose bush swayed gently. 3 months and not a single flower. The fairy shrugged. Adrian felt genuinely offended. Hector couldn't help smiling. It was ridiculous. Completely ridiculous. This was the same Adrian who had defeated veteran knights. The same Adrian who was considered one of the kingdom's greatest swordsmen. The same Adrian who could cast advanced magic. Yet here he was arguing with flowers and losing. The smile remained on Hector's face longer than expected. Eventually he realized something. No one knew this side of Adrian. The nobles certainly didn't. The king didn't. The knights didn't. To them, Adrian was always composed, graceful, perfect, the ideal crown prince. Only Hector knew about this version. The Adrian who talked to plants. The Adrian who celebrated when flowers bloomed. The Adrian who spent hours arguing with fairies over completely meaningless things. For some reason, that realization felt strangely precious, as though he had been entrusted with a secret, a part of Adrian that belonged to nobody else. The thought lingered longer than it should have. Then another thought followed, one that immediately froze him in place. A memory showed Adrian laughing. Not the polite smile he gave nobles, not the diplomatic smile he used in public. A genuine laugh, bright, carefree, happy. Hector suddenly realized something. He had never actually seen Adrian's face. Not really. All the memories came from Adrian's perspective. He could experience Adrian's emotions, hear his thoughts, feel what he felt. But he could never see Adrian himself, only what Adrian had seen. The realization bothered him, far more than it should have. He found himself imagining, what would he look like while laughing? Would he smile often? Would his eyes narrow when he laughed? Would he look different when nobody was watching? What expression would Adrian make while talking to flowers? The questions appeared one after another. He probably looked ridiculous. The thought appeared so suddenly that Hector nearly walked into a rose bush. And then Hector's brain finally caught up. He stopped walking. "What am I doing?" he questioned himself. Then he slowly blinked. Why exactly was he imagining that? A few moments ago, he had been thinking about Adrian talking to flowers. Now he was trying to imagine what Adrian looked like while doing it. Not only that, his brain had apparently decided it was important information. Would Adrian smile while talking to flowers? Would he laugh? Would he pout when the flower fairies ignored him? Would he? No. Hector immediately cut off the thought. Absolutely not. This was getting strange. Very strange. He resumed walking. 3 steps later, he stopped again. Silence. A butterfly landed nearby. Even it seemed judgmental. "I am standing in a garden." He pointed at himself. thinking about how another man looked while gardening. The butterfly flew away, probably to avoid involvement. Hector covered his face. What has happened to me? Am I losing my mind? No answer came, which was fortunate. Hector sighed. He was imagining the appearance of a dead man he had never actually met, a dead man whose body he currently occupied, a dead man whose memories he carried, a dead man he would never be able to speak to. The thought suddenly hurt. The feeling appeared so unexpectedly that it caught him completely off guard. His chest tightened. For a moment, he struggled to understand why. Why did it hurt? Why did it matter? Why was he feeling regret over someone he had never known? The answer never came. Instead, there was only silence and a strange ache, as though he had lost something precious, before ever having the chance to hold it. Hector looked away. No point thinking about it. His voice sounded quieter than usual. The dead remained dead. That was a lesson he had learned long ago. So he pushed the thoughts aside, or at least attempted to. The thoughts stubbornly refused to leave entirely, but they became easier to ignore as he approached the far end of the garden. There, hidden behind countless flowering plants, stood two enormous wisteria trees, their branches intertwined overhead. Purple blossoms hung like curtains. Most people would walk past without noticing anything unusual. But Adrian's memories guided Hector directly toward the hidden entrance. Nestled between the trees was an old stone door. Ancient runes covered its surface. Powerful protective magic pulsed beneath them. Hector examined the runes carefully, even with Adrian's memories. The complexity impressed him. Paranoid, he nodded approvingly. Good. The runes weren't merely locks. They verified identity, mana signatures, soul resonance, bloodline recognition. Anyone else attempting to force entry would likely trigger several unpleasant surprises. One memory surfaced. Adrian spending 6 months designing the security system. Another memory. A flower fairy asking what would happen if someone tried breaking in. Adrian had smiled, then listed 18 different methods of magical retaliation. The fairy had immediately stopped asking questions. Hector laughed at the memory. See? He pointed at the door. This is why nobody believed you're harmless. Stepping forward, he raised his hand. Over the past several weeks, he had practically abused Adrian's body with training. Swordsmanship, mana control, magic theory, spell casting, combat applications. If magic existed, Hector wanted to understand it. His first attempts had been embarrassing. One training session ended with him accidentally freezing a fountain. Another ended with him setting his own sleeve on fire. A third, somehow, resulted in 27 angry chickens chasing him across the palace courtyard. To this day, he still didn't understand that one. The palace staff certainly remembered it. The head knight still laughed whenever he saw him. Fortunately, things had improved. Now, he could use Adrian's magic nearly as naturally as Adrian himself once had. Mana gathered around his fingertips. The runes illuminated. Ancient symbols glowed across the stone. Then Hector spoke the incantation. The words flowed effortlessly. The magic responded instantly. The ground trembled softly. The runes brightened. One by one, the seals unlocked. A deep rumbling echoed through the garden. Then the stone door slowly opened. Cool air drifted outward. Darkness waited beyond. Hector's expression became serious. The garden, the flowers, the memories, all of it faded from his mind, because whatever lay inside this room represented years of Adrian's efforts, years of secrets, years of evidence, years of preparation that had ultimately failed to save Adrian's life. Hector stared into the darkness. Then he smiled slightly. Let's see what you've been hiding from everyone. And with that, the former king of the underworld stepped into the secret room built by the kingdom's kindest prince. Neither of them could have imagined how much trouble waited inside. The moment Hector stepped inside, the stone door closed behind him with a heavy thud. Darkness filled the room. A second later, dozens of magical crystals embedded in the walls automatically lit up. Soft golden light spread through the chamber, and Hector immediately stopped walking. His eye twitched. What exactly am I looking at? This wasn't what he expected. At all. He had imagined secret reports, hidden intelligence networks, carefully organized evidence, maps, perhaps a few weapons, maybe some emergency funds. Instead, the room looked like a mixture between a spy headquarters and the storage room of an overly enthusiastic squirrel. Every available wall was covered with notes, hundreds of them, red strings connected documents. Maps were pinned everywhere. Names, dates, family trees, political alliances, business transactions, suspected crimes, potential motives, possible accomplices. The sheer amount of information was astonishing. But that wasn't what caught Hector's attention. What caught his attention was the labels. One wall read, "People who are definitely suspicious." Another wall read, "People who are probably suspicious." Another, "People who might be suspicious." And another, "People who look suspicious but are actually probably nice." Hector stared, then looked again, then sighed. "Adrian," he rubbed his forehead, "you were too nice to be running an intelligence operation." Walking closer, he found another board. This one was titled, "People I Should Probably Not Trust." The list contained nearly 300 names. Hector blinked. Well, at least your instincts worked. Then he noticed something else. A smaller note had been pinned beneath the board, written in Adrian's handwriting. "If I ever become overly paranoid, please ignore this board." Hector slowly looked at the 300 names again, then at the note, then back at the names. You weren't paranoid enough. He moved deeper into the room. The more he explored, the more impressed he became. Despite Adrian's tendency to over-explain everything, the information itself was excellent, extremely detailed. Political factions, military influence, financial records, secret meetings, suspicious incidents spanning over 10 years. This wasn't the work of an amateur. This was the work of someone who had been quietly preparing for a war nobody knew existed, a war Adrian had been fighting alone. Then Hector noticed a large bookshelf. He walked over. Rows upon rows of journals filled the shelves. Every journal was labeled by year. The earliest entries dated back to when Adrian was only 10 years old. Hector pulled one out, opened it, and immediately regretted it. Day 17. Today Lady Veronia smiled at me. She was very kind. Perhaps she isn't a bad person. Hector opened another journal. 3 pages later. Lady Veronia attempted to poison my tea. Another journal. Lord Cedric apologized sincerely. Next page. Lord Cedric was lying. Another. Maybe I'm becoming too suspicious. Next page. I was not becoming too suspicious. Hector laughed despite himself. The pattern repeated for years. Adrian would try believing in people. People would betray him. Adrian would become cautious, then immediately convince himself he was being unfair, then get betrayed again. Hector sat down. For a long moment, he simply stared at the journals. There was something both admirable and frustrating about Adrian. Any normal person would have become cynical. Any normal person would have stopped trusting people. Adrian somehow kept trying. Again and again. It was honestly impressive. And incredibly stupid. Mostly impressive. Slightly stupid. Maybe 50-50. While examining another shelf, Hector suddenly discovered a hidden compartment. Inside sat several crystal recordings. Now that was interesting. Crystal recordings were difficult to fake. They captured sounds and images directly, evidence that could stand before any court. Hector activated one. A projection appeared. A nobleman was exchanging money with a known smuggler. Another crystal showed a secret meeting. Another revealed bribery. Another showed attempted election manipulation within the noble council. By the time Hector reached the 10th crystal, he realized something. Adrian possessed enough evidence to destroy multiple noble houses, possibly start a civil war, possibly collapse half the royal court, and yet none of it had ever been used. Why? The answer came immediately from Adrian's memories. Because using it recklessly would hurt innocent people. Because thousands of servants worked under those houses. Because entire regions depended on those nobles. Because exposing everything at once could destabilize the kingdom. Because Adrian always prioritized the kingdom over himself. Hector closed his eyes. A long sigh escaped him. Of course you did. Sometimes Adrian was so painfully good that it became irritating. Then Hector noticed something strange. A section of the room was completely isolated from the rest. Unlike the other shelves, this one was protected by additional magical barriers. Powerful ones. Far stronger than anything else in the room. Hector immediately became interested. Now that's suspicious. He approached. The barrier recognized Adrian's mana and dissolved instantly. Inside were only 3 objects. 1 black notebook, 1 sealed envelope, and 1 small wooden box. The moment Hector saw them, Adrian's memories reacted violently. His chest tightened. His heartbeat accelerated. A powerful wave of emotion washed over him. Grief, loneliness, pain, love. Hector froze. The feelings weren't his. They were Adrian's. Yet they hit him so strongly, he almost staggered backward. Slowly, he reached toward the black notebook. He already had a feeling whose belongings these were. The notebook opened. Elegant handwriting filled the first page. My dearest Adrian. Everything became silent. Hector stared at those words, then slowly sat down, because he immediately understood. These were the last things Adrian's mother had left behind. And judging by the strength of the emotions flooding through him, this was a true reason. Adrian had protected this room for all these years. Not the evidence, not the secrets, not the investigations, but because this room contained the one thing Adrian treasured most, the last remaining pieces of his mother. For several moments, Hector simply sat there, holding the notebook, feeling emotions that weren't entirely his, yet somehow didn't feel completely foreign anymore. Then he quietly muttered, You really carried all of this alone, didn't you? For the first time since entering the secret room, Hector forgot about conspiracies, forgot about poisonings, forgot about enemies, and instead found himself wanting to learn more about the boy who had spent years fighting an impossible battle with nobody by his side. A boy named Adrian Aurelius. Hector stared at the notebook for several seconds, then several more, and then even longer, not because he was overwhelmed by emotion. Certainly not. He was merely preparing himself. Yes, preparing. Because if there was one thing Hector Carmine had learned from Adrian's memories, it was that anything involving Adrian's mother carried enough emotional force to hit like a siege weapon. Slowly, he opened the notebook. The first page contained neat, elegant handwriting. My dearest Adrian. Immediately, another memory surfaced. A small silver-haired boy sitting on his mother's lap, listening to stories, laughing, safe, loved. The memory disappeared almost as quickly as it came. Hector frowned. His chest felt uncomfortable again. He was beginning to dislike this sensation. The notebook continued. If you are reading this, then it means I was unable to tell you these things myself. Which means fate has once again ignored my preferences. Hector blinked, then blinked again. She sounds nothing like I expected. He had imagined a graceful queen, dignified, elegant, wise. But the first sentence instead sounded like someone already annoyed with destiny. He kept reading. If fate exists, then I would like to formally complain. Hector laughed, a genuine laugh. The sound echoed through the room. For a moment, he almost expected Adrian's mother to continue arguing with fate on the next page. And he was right. She did. For 3 pages. The queen apparently had many complaints. By the 5th page, Hector was forced to conclude something. Adrian had inherited his habit of talking to things that couldn't answer back. Apparently, it ran in the family. The realization made him smile. Then the smile gradually disappeared as the contents became more serious. The notebook wasn't a political document. It wasn't instructions or some hidden royal secret. It was simply a mother speaking to her son. Every page contained advice, stories, memories, little lessons she wanted Adrian to remember. One page described how she accidentally flooded part of the palace while attempting beginner water magic. Another described how she once got lost inside her own garden. For 3 hours, the future queen, lost in her own garden. Hector stared at the page, then looked around the room, then back at the page. Adrian, he pointed at the notebook. Your family is strange. A memory immediately surfaced. Adrian laughing while his mother chased a flower fairy with a broom. Hector lowered his hand. Very strange. As he continued reading, he began noticing something. Many of the stories weren't random. They all carried lessons. Subtle lessons. Lessons about leadership, about kindness, about responsibility, about surviving loneliness. Then he found a particular passage, and his smile vanished. If one day you find yourself alone, remember this. Being alone does not mean nobody loves you. It only means those who love you are not beside you right now. Hector stopped reading. The room became silent. He knew exactly when she had written this. She already knew she was dying. She had been writing these words for a child she would never watch grow up. For several moments, he simply sat there. Then he quietly closed the notebook. He suddenly understood why Adrian had protected this room so fiercely. This wasn't merely a keepsake. This was the only place where Adrian could still be a son, not a prince, not an heir, not a political symbol, just a son who missed his mother, a son who visited this room whenever the world became too heavy. The realization made Hector look around differently. Now he noticed the details. A chair positioned near a window, a blanket folded carefully nearby, several unfinished books, pressed flowers stored between pages, a tea set, a collection of carved wooden figures, small things, ordinary things, things that had nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with power, nothing to do with survival. For Adrian, this room wasn't a secret base. It was home, a place where nobody expected anything from him, a place where he didn't need to be perfect, a place where he could breathe. And suddenly Hector understood why Adrian always came here after difficult days. Because Hector found himself relaxing as well, which was deeply suspicious. He was a former criminal mastermind, investigating a murder. He should not be feeling peaceful. Yet somehow he did. His attention shifted toward the small wooden box. Unlike the notebook, it wasn't locked. He opened it. Inside were dozens of letters. Some were written by Adrian, some by his mother. Others appeared to be letters Adrian never sent. Curious, Hector picked one up, then immediately regretted it. It was painfully personal. Mother, today I won my first tournament. I wanted to tell you. The handwriting was young, uneven. The letter continued. The king congratulated me. I was happy. I think. The final line nearly made Hector close the letter. I wish you had been there. Silence filled the room. Hector slowly placed it back. Then another, and another. Each one documented Adrian's life, his victories, his failures, his fears, the things he couldn't tell anyone, the things he wished his mother could hear. By the 5th letter, Hector was feeling increasingly uncomfortable, not because the contents were unpleasant, because they felt private, far too private, like he was reading someone's heart, a heart that had never been shown to anyone else. Then he found the final letter, the most recent one, written only a few days before the poisoning. Hector hesitated. Something told him this letter would be different. Slowly, he unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, mature, steady, but there was exhaustion hidden between the lines. Mother, I think I am getting tired. Hector's grip tightened. The letter continued. I am not afraid, at least not for myself. I only regret that I haven't been able to protect everything you loved. A long silence followed, then the final paragraph. If one day I am no longer here, I hope someone kinder than me inherits my responsibilities. If such a person exists. A bitter smile appeared on Hector's face. Your standards are impossible, Hector thought. Then he continued reading. The final line made him freeze. If such a person exists, I hope they get the chance to live more freely than I did. The room became silent. For a long moment, Hector simply stared at those words, then slowly lowered the letter. Somewhere inside him, something hurt, not sharply, not painfully, just enough to leave a lingering ache. Because Adrian would never know how wrong he was. He had worried his entire life about protecting others. Yet even now, after death, he was still worrying about the person who would come after him. Hector laughed quietly. You really were impossible, Adrian. A small smile appeared. Then he looked toward the darkness beyond the room, toward everyone who had contributed to Adrian's suffering. His eyes slowly narrowed. The warmth remained, but something colder appeared beneath it. Something dangerous, familiar. The same look that once preceded the downfall of powerful men. Someone kinder than you. Hector folded the letter carefully and returned it to the box. Then he stood. I'm definitely not that person. The room seemed to agree. However, a slow smile appeared. I am much better at making people's lives miserable. And for the first time since entering the hidden room, Hector finally turned his attention toward the evidence Adrian had spent years collecting. Because the time for remembering the dead was over, now it was time to deal with the living. Outside the room, hidden among the flowers, several tiny flower fairies peeked through the window. One of them pointed toward Hector. Isn't that Adrian? Another fairy tilted her head. Looks like Adrian. A third fairy squinted suspiciously. Then why is he smiling like he's about to commit 12 crimes? The others looked at Hector, then immediately nodded. Good point. Something was, definitely, different.
Thank you for listening all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and tell me your thoughts in the comments below. It really helps the channel. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next chapter of Hector and Adrian's journey. Until then, take care, have a wonderful day, and I'll see you again in the next video.